I had been prepared for every angle. It wasn't just the evidence I was relying on, it was the people I knew. I had worked tirelessly to secure a backup plan of my own. A few key phone calls, a few well-placed favors, and I had managed to find a whistleblower within the Attorney General's office. This person had insider knowledge, and they knew exactly what the HOA and the developers had been doing behind the scenes. They were willing to testify that the emergency injunction was nothing more than a last-ditch effort to save the corrupt system from falling apart. The whistleblower arrived in court, taking the stand with a shaky but determined voice. Their testimony revealed how the state attorney's office had been pressured into issuing the injunction, how the officials had been promised kickbacks in exchange for stalling the case. The room was stunned into silence. The tables had turned once again, and this time, it wasn't just the HOA who was on the chopping block. It was the entire corrupt network that had been working to protect them. The judge immediately issued a ruling, dismissing the injunction and allowing the case to continue. With the defense's last hope dashed, we went in for the kill. My lawyer, fueled by the evidence we had uncovered, laid out the full extent of the corruption. We painted a picture of a coordinated effort to manipulate the system for profit at the expense of hard-working homeowners like myself. The developer's representative, the county officials, the HOA, all of them were implicated. It was a stunning victory. By the end of the trial, the judge issued a ruling that was both a personal victory and a massive blow to the corrupt network. The Willow Creek HOA was held liable for all the damages, and they were ordered to pay restitution to every homeowner who had been wronged by their illegal actions. But it didn't stop there. The state attorney's office was forced to launch an investigation into the corruption within their own ranks, and the developers were banned from pursuing any further projects in the area. The media erupted with coverage, and the story went viral. The Willow Creek HOA, once a powerful and untouchable force, was now exposed for what they truly were: a group of corrupt criminals who had abused their power to line their pockets at the expense of innocent families. The aftermath was swift and unforgiving. The remaining members of the HOA were arrested, and several county officials resigned in disgrace. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching my kids play in the yard, I couldn't help but smile. The fight had been long, and it had been hard, but I had won. The HOA, the developers, and the corrupt officials had all been brought down. My land was safe, and justice had been served. Not just for me, but for every other homeowner who had been pushed around by these bullies. The victory wasn't just mine. It was a win for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of authority. And as the sun set over my land, I knew one thing for sure: they would never mess with me again. The weeks after the trial were a strange mix of relief and disbelief. The Willow Creek HOA had been obliterated, their empire crumbling beneath the weight of their own corruption. It was the kind of victory you dream about, the kind that makes you feel invincible. My land was safe. The developers were banned from pursuing further projects. The corrupt officials were either arrested or forced to resign. But despite all of this, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't over. The calm that followed felt almost too quiet, like the eye of a storm. It started with an unexpected phone call. The number wasn't familiar, and I almost didn't answer, but something told me I needed to. "Mr. Carter?" a voice on the other end asked. "This is Monica Turner from the Willow Creek Community Watch Association. I have information you need to hear." I didn't know who she was, but the mention of Willow Creek immediately piqued my interest. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's something you don't know about the HOA's downfall," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "You've only scratched the surface. The HOA was just the front. They were working with a much bigger organization, one that's still active. If you want to finish this, you need to listen carefully." My pulse quickened. I had already taken down the Willow Creek HOA, but what was she talking about? An even bigger organization? It didn't make sense. I was still trying to process everything she had said when she dropped the bombshell. The HOA didn't just act on their own. They were part of a national network of property management firms that have been systematically defrauding homeowners across the country. They use tactics like yours: bullying, legal manipulation, and sometimes outright theft. They've been operating for years, and now that Willow Creek is gone, they're targeting other neighborhoods. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process this new information. I thought I had ended the nightmare. I thought I had fought the good fight and won. But now I realized that the battle was far from over. The entire system was rotten, and I had only exposed a small part of it. Monica explained that she had worked as a community organizer, trying to help homeowners fight back against these corrupt property management firms. She had been monitoring the network for years and had seen firsthand how deep it ran. The Willow Creek HOA was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. We've been tracking them for months, Monica continued, and they're moving faster now, trying to consolidate power in even more neighborhoods. You were right to take down Willow Creek, but there's still so much more to uncover. If you want to help people, to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else, you need to keep going. You need to expose the entire network. It was clear that I couldn't just walk away now. The fight had only just begun. I thanked Monica for the information, promising to think about what she had said. The next few days were spent researching the property management firm she mentioned, trying to piece together a picture of how this network worked. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but the more I dug, the more I realized she was right. The corruption ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. One evening, I received another unexpected call, this time from my attorney. His voice was tight, as if he was struggling to keep his emotions in check. "I've got bad news," he said. "The developers have filed an appeal. They're not giving up. They found a loophole in the ruling, and they're trying to overturn everything we've worked for. They're claiming that the damages you were awarded were excessive, and they're asking for the case to be reopened." My heart sank. Just when I thought it was all over, the developers were trying to claw their way back. The victory I had won in court was now under threat, and I could see the same manipulative tactics coming at me again. But this time, I wasn't going to let them win. They had already tried to ruin my life. I had fought back. Now it was time to finish what I had started. I spent the next few days preparing for a new round of legal battles, but there was something else I had to consider. The larger network of property management firms that Monica had warned me about. They were still out there, still working behind the scenes, trying to manipulate the system to their advantage. I knew I had to find a way to take them down once and for all. I couldn't let them destroy any more lives. I called Monica again, and together we devised a plan. This wasn't just about one neighborhood or one corrupt HOA. It was about taking down an entire industry that had been operating unchecked for far too long. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but with the evidence I had collected and the support of people like Monica, we had a chance to expose the truth. The first step was to build a coalition of homeowners who had been wronged by these firms. I reached out to neighbors in other communities, people who had faced similar abuses, and together we formed a united front. We filed complaints, gathered evidence, and prepared for another court battle. But this time, it wasn't just about me. It was about every homeowner who had been taken advantage of. It was about making sure that no one else had to go through what I had experienced. The developers tried everything to shut us down, from legal threats to intimidation tactics. They even tried to bribe key witnesses, but we were ready for them. Monica and I had done our homework, and we had all the evidence we needed to expose their scheme. The courtroom battles became fiercer, but we stood our ground. The tide was turning. In the end, the developers and their partners were exposed for what they truly were, a corrupt network of property management firms that had been extorting homeowners across the country for years. The case was a national sensation. News outlets picked up the story, and investigations were launched into the broader network. Multiple criminal charges were filed, and several high-ranking officials were arrested. The entire system was shaken to its core. As for me, the victory was bittersweet. The fight had taken everything out of me, time, energy, and resources, but it had been worth it. The developers were finally held accountable, and I had done my part to ensure that no one else would fall victim to their schemes. The Willow Creek HOA was gone, and with it, the corrupt network that had fueled their power. Sitting on my porch one evening, watching the sunset over my land, I knew that the fight had been worth it. The battle was over, but the war had been won. My family was safe, and our land was ours again. I had taken down an entire network of corrupt corporations, and I had made sure that no one else would have to go through what we did. The world was a little bit better because of it. The wind whispered through the trees, and I smiled. No one would ever mess with me again. No one would ever mess with anyone again. The fight had ended, but the message was clear: corruption would never win. Not while there were people like me, willing to stand up and fight for what was right. Just when I thought the dust had settled and the nightmare was finally over, I received a call that threatened to pull everything I'd fought for right out from under me. It was late one evening, and I was sitting in my office, reflecting on the long battle that had finally come to an end. The Willow Creek HOA was gone. The developers were disgraced, and the corrupt officials had been exposed. My land was secure, my family safe, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. But then the phone rang. It was Jack. His voice was tight with urgency. "You need to get over to the courthouse," he said. "Something's not right. They're trying to pull something, and it's big. You're not going to believe this." I felt the familiar weight of tension settle in my chest. What now? The legal victory had felt final, but as I quickly realized, nothing was ever truly over when you were dealing with powerful, corrupt organizations. I told Jack I would meet him there, grabbing my coat and heading out the door. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, but I never could have prepared myself for what was about to unfold. When I arrived at the courthouse, the place was packed, far busier than it should have been for a case that was supposedly closed. People were standing outside in small groups, talking in hushed voices. The air was thick with anticipation. I found Jack near the entrance, his face grim. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice low. Jack didn't waste any time. They filed a new lawsuit, a massive one. The developers, the same ones we thought were finished, they're not just suing you. They got the entire county government behind them now. They're trying to declare the ruling invalid, claiming that the evidence we used was tampered with. They've also got some new evidence they've discovered that suggests you were involved in a whole network of illegal activities. They're coming after your reputation. This is bigger than I thought. My heart sank. How could they have come back with something like this? I thought I had put all the pieces together. This was supposed to be the end. Yet here I was, facing down an even more dangerous fight, one that could destroy everything I'd worked so hard for. We walked into the courtroom, where the judge was already seated. The developer's legal team stood at the front, smug and confident, as if they knew they had the upper hand. And sitting next to them was a face I hadn't expected to see. Monica Turner, the woman who had helped me uncover the vast network of corruption that stretched across the country. She was sitting in the back row, her eyes flicking between me and the opposing lawyers. I had no idea what she was doing there, but I wasn't about to trust anyone at that moment. The trial began with the developers presenting their new case, an accusation of fraud against me. They claimed that the evidence I had used to expose them was fabricated, manipulated to fit my narrative. They presented documents that proved I had orchestrated the entire thing. Falsifying zoning records, bribing officials, even paying people off to create fake evidence of their corruption. They accused me of being part of the very thing I had worked so hard to dismantle. The documents they presented were legitimate looking, and the accusations seemed damning. The whole room fell silent as they laid out their argument, piece by piece. I was blindsided. I had worked tirelessly to gather the evidence that had brought them down, and now they were turning it against me. They had somehow twisted everything, and now I was the villain in this twisted version of events. I felt the blood drain from my face as the defense's strategy became clear. They weren't just trying to discredit me. They were trying to ruin me. I looked over at my lawyer, hoping for some sign of hope, but his face was pale. It was clear that this new accusation could destroy everything. My reputation, my career, my family's future. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was an all-out war for my life. Then, just when it seemed like I was about to lose everything, a twist no one expected happened. Monica Turner stood up. The room went quiet as she approached the stand, surprising everyone. The defense's lawyer looked annoyed, clearly unprepared for this move. "What's this?" he sneered. "Another surprise witness? You're wasting everyone's time." But Monica wasn't there to waste time. She was there to reveal the truth. She took a deep breath, and what she said next changed everything. You all think this is about a neighborhood or some piece of land. She began, her voice steady but sharp. But you've got it all wrong. This is about something much bigger. And I know because I've been tracking this network for years. The developers are lying. The entire case they've built against Mr. Carter is a setup. She pulled out a thick folder, much like the one she had given me months ago. But this time, it was full of even more incriminating evidence. Monica had spent the past several weeks tracking down the remaining members of the network I thought we had destroyed. She had followed the money, connected the dots, and uncovered the real criminals behind the scenes. The developers were just pawns. The true masterminds were far more dangerous. They were using their wealth, influence, and legal tactics to dismantle entire neighborhoods, using property management firms, local officials, and bribes to manipulate the system. Monica's voice rang out, clear and certain, as she revealed the truth. The developers weren't just operating locally. They were working with international syndicates, funding black market operations, and laundering money through illegal real estate deals. The fraud you've heard about? It's just the beginning. These people were trying to cover their tracks by taking down anyone who stood in their way, including Mr. Carter. The courtroom was in chaos. The judge called for order, but it was clear that everything had shifted. Monica's testimony had opened the floodgates. The defense's carefully constructed case had collapsed under the weight of her words. She laid out the connections between the developers, international criminals, and the corrupt officials who had helped them. The room was stunned into silence as the full scale of the conspiracy came to light. By the end of the day, the judge had ruled in my favor. The case against me was thrown out, and the developers were not only found guilty of orchestrating the fraud, but also charged with multiple criminal offenses. The entire network of property management firms was exposed, their operations shut down for good. The truth had finally come to light, and those responsible for the years of suffering and manipulation were going to face the consequences. As I walked out of the courthouse, I couldn't believe what had just happened. The battle had been long and hard, but in the end, I had won. The developers were going to jail. The corrupt officials were being investigated, and I had helped bring down an entire criminal empire. Monica and I stood outside the courthouse, watching the sunset. The fight was over. I had my land, my family was safe, and the corrupt system had been dismantled. The feeling of victory washed over me, but it was different this time. This wasn't just about me. This was about every person who had been taken advantage of, every homeowner who had been bullied by powerful organizations. The world was a little safer, a little freer. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just the end of my story. It was the end of their reign. It all began on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, but that day would change my life forever. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and I was sitting in my living room sipping a cup of coffee when the letter arrived. I wasn't expecting anything important. After all, who gets excited about another boring piece of mail? But this one was different. The envelope was thick, official, and stamped with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, HOA, logo. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another one of their petty complaints, I assumed. Maybe something about my lawn or my mailbox. I had gotten these before. But when I tore open the envelope and started reading, my stomach dropped. The letter was short and to the point, with no sugarcoating. It stated that the Willow Creek HOA had approved a development project on a land adjacent to mine. But this wasn't just any development. They were planning to build 58 new homes. My land, which I had inherited from my grandparents, was now in their crosshairs. The worst part? They were planning to bulldoze part of my property to make room for this monstrosity. The HOA had already signed off on it, and the county had approved the plan without even consulting me. They told me they had the right to do so because of some vague zoning rule they had dug up from years ago. I was blindsided. This was my land, my family's land, and they were taking it without a second thought. How could they just do that? I had always believed that land ownership meant something, that the law would protect me from such outrageous behavior. But clearly, the HOA thought they could do whatever they wanted. They were going to tear down the trees my grandfather had planted, destroy the orchard I had spent years tending to, and ruin the privacy and peace we had enjoyed for generations. And worst of all, they weren't even giving me a chance to fight back. They had already given the developers the green light to start. I felt a surge of anger flood through me. I called my lawyer, hoping against hope that there was some mistake. Maybe there was a loophole or a technicality I could use to block their plans. But after reviewing the documents, my lawyer broke the news. The HOA was in the right. The zoning laws, which I'd never thought to check, gave them the authority to push ahead with the project. The land I thought was safe, the land I thought was mine, was being taken from me, legally. It was a crushing blow. What was I supposed to do now? The legal battle would be long and expensive. I didn't have the time or the money to fight a giant like the Willow Creek HOA. They were too powerful, and I was just a regular guy trying to protect his property. But then something snapped inside me. I wasn't going to just stand by and let them take what was rightfully mine. They thought they could trample over me because I was just one person, but they had no idea who they were messing with. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. This was about something much bigger, the principle of it. They were bullying me, taking advantage of their power, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. It wasn't about the law anymore. It was about justice. That's when the idea came to me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The Willow Creek HOA had gone too far, and they needed to be taught a lesson they would never forget. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them ruin my life. No, I was going to fight back. But I wasn't going to do it the usual way. I wasn't going to drag this out in court and waste years of my life on legal fees. I was going to hit them where it hurt the most, where they least expected it. I was going to make their precious development a living nightmare. I called my old friend Jack. He was a contractor and had worked on several large-scale projects in the area. He owed me a favor, and I was about to call in. We met at my property the next night, and I laid out my plan. At first, Jack wasn't sure what to think. He wasn't the type of guy to get involved in anything that wasn't strictly business. But when I explained what had happened and how the HOA had taken advantage of me, he saw where I was coming from. "You want to make them regret ever messing with you, don't you?" he asked. I nodded. Exactly. We didn't waste any time. I had a bulldozer, and Jack had the equipment. It was risky, sure, but sometimes you have to take risks to win. The plan was simple: destroy the driveways they had already built, tear up their roads, crush their foundations, and turn the entire area into a mess they couldn't ignore. And that wasn't all. I had something else planned for the land they were trying to take from me. If I couldn't stop the construction, I could at least make sure it wasn't usable. I knew about a small creek nearby. If I could divert the water, it would flood the development site. It would turn their perfectly manicured community into a swamp, rendering it useless. It was genius. They thought they could just waltz in and take my land. I was going to make them regret it. That night, Jack and I drove out to the construction site, the sound of the bulldozer's engine breaking the silence of the countryside. The moon was high in the sky, casting an eerie light over the area. As we reached the first driveway, I couldn't help but smile. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I took the controls of the bulldozer, and with one swift motion, I plowed through the gravel, smashing the driveway to pieces. It felt like sweet, sweet revenge. The sound of the gravel shattering was music to my ears. But I wasn't done. I continued to destroy the driveways, one after another, until the entire development area was a wreck. The satisfaction I felt was overwhelming. But that was just the beginning. I knew I had to take a step further. As I made my way toward the creek, I couldn't help but feel a sense of power. This was my land, and no one was going to take it from me. I worked quickly, using the equipment I had to reroute the water. I watched as the water began to pool, slowly flooding the area where the new homes were supposed to be built. By the time we finished, the site was unrecognizable, a muddy, waterlogged mess. The developers wouldn't be able to do a thing. They had thought they could just take my land, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. They thought they were invincible, but now their dream project was nothing more than a swamp. It was a rush like nothing I had ever felt before. The power, the control, the satisfaction of making them pay for their arrogance. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The Willow Creek HOA had started this fight, but I was going to finish it. and they had no idea what was coming next. The next few days were a whirlwind. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd done. The swamp I had created in the middle of their development was a mess, a beautiful disaster. Every time I drove past, I felt a sense of satisfaction, watching the construction crews stare at the flooded land in confusion, unable to do anything about it. They hadn't expected anyone to fight back, let alone turn their development into a nightmare. But that's exactly what I had done, and I knew the HOA wasn't going to just let it slide. I couldn't afford to get complacent, though. I knew that what I had done was drastic, and I was sure the HOA would retaliate. But what could they do? They couldn't sue me for vandalism because I hadn't just destroyed the land. I had made it uninhabitable. And if it tried to call the police, well, I had already covered my tracks. I didn't just go in and wreck their development. I made sure no one could prove I was behind it. The next morning, I received a call from Jack. His voice was shaky. "You better check the news, man," he said. "I think you've just lit a fuse you can't put out." I turned on the TV and saw a live broadcast from Willow Creek. The developers were on site, speaking to the camera, trying to explain what had happened. They claimed that the flooding was the result of a natural disaster, some freak weather event. But there was a noticeable panic in their voices. They had no idea what was coming, no idea that someone had made this happen intentionally. The HOA had to know it was me. They had to. But why hadn't they come after me yet? I spent the rest of the day waiting for the HOA to make their move. They had to retaliate. They couldn't just let someone sabotage their entire project without consequences. But the days dragged on, and nothing happened. No lawsuits, no threats, nothing. It was almost too quiet. I was starting to wonder if the HOA had backed down. Maybe they were just going to write it off as a random act of nature and pretend like they had no idea who was behind it. But then, a week later, I got the letter. This time, it wasn't from the HOA. It was from a law firm. Their name was unfamiliar, but they didn't need to be well-known to pack a punch. The letter was filled with legal jargon, but the message was clear. They were taking me to court. The Willow Creek HOA had hired one of the most aggressive legal firms in the country, and they were coming after me for everything I had. They were accusing me of intentionally flooding the development site, damaging property, and causing a disruption to the construction. They wanted compensation for their losses, and they were demanding a hefty sum, far more than I could ever afford to pay. I sat there staring at the letter, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I'd known retaliation was coming, but I hadn't expected it to hit this hard. This wasn't just a fine or a warning. This was serious. The kind of legal battle that would drain my life savings and leave me in debt for years to come. I was in trouble, real trouble, and I needed to act fast. I called my lawyer, but when he picked up, he didn't sound like the usual calm, reassuring voice I was used to. He was frantic. "Listen, this is bad. The HOA isn't just suing you. They've got connections. This law firm has pulled out all the stops. They've got evidence that could tie you directly to the flooding. If they can prove it, you're done. You need to settle this now before it gets any worse." I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about survival. I couldn't afford to lose everything. I couldn't let the HOA win. But how could I fight back against a firm like this? They had resources, power, and the kind of reach that could destroy my life. I spent the next few days meeting with my lawyer and strategizing. We had a few angles we could explore, loopholes in the zoning laws, the fact that the HOA had never consulted me about the development in the first place, and their illegal encroachment on my land. But none of that was a guaranteed win. The evidence they had was damning, and the thought of spending years in court, fighting for my property, made my blood run cold. Just when I thought I had no more options, I got an unexpected phone call from Jack. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I've got something you need to see, something that might help you out of this mess." I met him at a small diner on the edge of town. He slid a folder across the table, and when I opened it, my heart skipped a beat. Inside were photographs, taken from a distance, but clear enough to make out the details. The photos showed a series of meetings, secretive conversations between HOA board members and the developers of the new homes. They were discussing plans to forcibly buy up properties, including mine, using underhanded tactics to acquire land without properly compensating the owners. They were planning to use their connections to bully homeowners into selling for pennies on the dollar. And if that didn't work, they were going to find ways to force them out. "This is the smoking gun," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know some of the people involved. I can get you access to more if you need it. But this is everything you need to expose them for what they really are." I sat there for a long moment, letting the weight of what I was holding sink in. This wasn't just a case of bad neighbors. This was a well-oiled machine of corruption, and I had the evidence to bring it all crashing down. I wasn't just fighting for my land anymore. I was fighting to expose an entire network of greed and manipulation. The developers, the HOA, they thought they could walk all over me. They had no idea that I was holding all the cards. I called my lawyer immediately. We had a new plan now, a better plan. Instead of trying to settle or avoid the fight, we were going to hit back harder than they could ever imagine. With the evidence Jack had provided, we were going to expose the HOA's illegal tactics, their attempts to bully and steal from homeowners. This was no longer just about me. It was about standing up to corruption, about making sure no one else would have to endure what I had. The game had changed, and the HOA had just met their match. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly, preparing the case, gathering more evidence, and building a strategy that would destroy the HOA once and for all. As the court date loomed, I knew that the battle was far from over. But this time, I wasn't fighting alone. And this time, I had the upper hand. The twisted empire of the Willow Creek HOA was about to come crashing down. They thought they could ruin my life. But in the end, I was going to make sure it was them who paid the price. The days leading up to the court date were tense. I barely slept. Constantly going over the evidence Jack had helped me uncover. My lawyer was more confident than ever, but I could feel the pressure building. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was personal. The Willow Creek HOA had tried to ruin my life, and now it was time to turn the tables. With each passing hour, the stakes grew higher. They had crossed the line, and I wasn't going to stop until they paid for it. On the morning of the trial, I sat in the courthouse waiting room, my hands shaking. The courtroom was packed, an audience of people who had heard about the Willow Creek HOA scandal. The media had caught wind of the case, and it was starting to gain attention. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. The story had become bigger than just my fight. It was about every homeowner who had ever been bullied by an HOA. It was about justice for people who had been too scared or too defeated to fight back. And I was standing at the front of it all. When the court session finally began, the tension in the room was palpable. The Willow Creek HOA's legal team was on the other side, smug and self-assured, as if they already knew the outcome. But there was a new energy in the room now, an unspoken confidence that they weren't going to get away with it this time. My lawyer was ready, and so was I. We presented the evidence, photographs, documents, emails, all of it pointing to the shady dealings between the developers and the HOA board. It was a rock-solid case. There was no way they could weasel out of it this time. But as the trial progressed, something unexpected happened. Just when we thought we had them cornered, the opposing lawyer made a shocking move. They called in a surprise witness. A man in a suit walked into the courtroom, his face familiar but not immediately recognizable. He was introduced as a representative from the county's zoning department, and he was there to testify in favor of the Willow Creek HOA. He claimed that the development project was entirely legal, that the land had been properly zoned for construction, and that the HOA had followed all necessary procedures. At first, I didn't understand why they were bringing in a witness like this. It seemed like a desperate move, trying to muddy the waters. But as the man spoke, something about his demeanor set me on edge. He was too smooth, too rehearsed. He spoke with authority, as if he knew exactly how to navigate the legal system. That's when it hit me. He was more than just a zoning official. He was an on it. He was part of the same corrupt system that had been trying to steal my land. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. This was a much deeper conspiracy, and the county had its hands in it too. I leaned over to my lawyer, whispering urgently, "This guy's in on it. He's part of the scheme." My lawyer's expression shifted. He hadn't caught it first, but now he could see it too. The pieces started to fall into place. The HOA wasn't just acting on their own. They had been using their connections in the county to push their agenda. It wasn't just illegal. It was a full-blown conspiracy. If we could expose this, it would tear apart the entire operation. The zoning official wasn't just a pawn. He was a key player in this entire mess. I couldn't afford to let them get away with this. This was bigger than my land, bigger than just me. The entire system had been rigged. The developers had been greasing palms, paying off officials, and forcing homeowners out of their property. They were getting away with it, and it was time to pull the curtain back on their dirty little secret. We quickly adjusted our strategy, using the unexpected witness as a springboard to expose the corruption at the county level. We subpoenaed his communications with the HOA, and what we uncovered was staggering. It wasn't just the zoning department. It was a network of officials who had been taking bribes to approve illegal developments and force homeowners into selling their property for far below market value. The shockwaves of this discovery rippled through the courtroom. The judge's face turned ashen, and the media jumped on the story. The case had just gone from a local dispute to a full-blown scandal. But just as the tide seemed to turn in our favor, a new twist emerged. The zoning official's testimony wasn't the only surprise they had in store. As we presented the new evidence, the defense played their trump card, a last-minute counterclaim. They had a backup plan. A powerful connection in the state attorney's office who was ready to swoop in and have the case thrown out on a technicality. The attorney general's office, they claimed, had issued an emergency injunction that blocked the case from proceeding. It was a move that could shut us down instantly. They had thought of everything, but what they didn't know was that I had already anticipated this.